Yeah, I did that so that if, for example, I get that hand and I have like a six in actual nuts hand, then I can uh then I won't be exploited as frequently. Okay, this is a fold. 2-6 off is not great. King ace, wow. We're getting straight banger hands. Okay. 6-10 suited. I like the suitedness. It's also connected, so or it's also somewhat connected, but
10-8
so we're
off.
gonna
Gonna be
raise
defending with
to
a call.
1.25.
Flop
I
top
am
pair.
using a
Can dunk
wider,
this
much wider
sometimes,
range
but
than last time.
it's mostly
Um,
gonna be a check.
two-tone. I don't know what to do on a two-tone flop. Check.
Okay, turns a jack. Not a great card for
Oh, okay,
hand
there's flush
range.
possibilities.
There's gonna be betting. It's gonna be small
There are some, I
bets
don't
on this
know whose
turn.
range that favors though.
I think
So I was the aggressor, but does that
I
mean
think
I have more
range mostly
flushes in my
wants to check
range?
on this
I
turn,
don't think
maybe
so.
like a good 70% of the time.
Actually,
And this hand probably wants to check even more than
it's
range. It
hard to tell.
has
I'm just
decent
gonna
showdown
check.
value, of course. Okay. So the four river changes nothing.
Yeah,
In theory,
uh,
he should be bluffing some. I guess a lot of 10 highs
honestly don't
bluff
know
the
what to make
turn.
of
So like
this one.
10, 10, 9, 10, 7 bluffs the turn.
I think if he bets is a clear
7, 6
fold.
bluffs the turn. So
We
in
have
theory,
no
he should be
equity.
bluffing his queen highs
It's
here.
very
And I don't think
straightforward.
he's doing that enough. So I'm gonna bet half pot here
Yeah, we just fold this one.
and see if we can. Okay, well, we can't find a call, but so here you raise a call. Going back to the single raise pots.
Yep.
And I was dealt 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds. All right, here I was thinking like maybe I can donk out sometimes too, but it's not as connected. Like there are no straights on board, whereas I think the first flop that I donked into you was like 8, 6, 5. So there were like a couple of straights out there. Here, there's no straights. I think you still have, like a pretty favorable equity advantage on this board. Although I would say this this board is actually more favorable for me. So funny thing is, it actually builds no donk into my strategy. What are your thoughts about sort of betting here?
So I had 6 of diamonds, 10 of diamonds. I wasn't really gonna bet. I thought that most of my range I'm going to check because all of these cards are pretty low cards, and it's a like kind of a dry board, although it is super tone, which kind of changes that things. But
Okay.
yeah, I just thought it was pretty simple check.
Yeah, 10-6, 10-6 might actually be a bet because it would fall close to the bottom of your range here.
Oh,
If you think about like how your range interacts with this board, right? Like obviously all of your big cards don't connect with it whatsoever, but they have showdown value.
Yep.
You can check through and win with ace high, king high, even queen high. If you think about your low cards here, right? Like either you're pairing or you have some sort of draw.
Yep.
Right. If you think about 10-6, it's kind of like almost literally the bottom of your range in the sense that it has
yeah,
no draw, no pair, and the high card is a 10, which means that you will very, very rarely win.
Yep.
What'll happen is either I'll have a draw with no showdown value, so I'll have like whatever 9-6 suited, 9-7 suited, something like that, and I'll bet at some point and then force you to fold, or um, or essentially like I'll have some other showdown value hand like an ace high or king high, and then I'll check, and then we'll check through, and then you'll lose at showdown, right? So I think 10-6 here, like the EV, like you gain the most EV from bet on the flop. Now, of course, you want to kind of bet with the suited the 10-6 that has some sort of backdoors here more often than you would with like the quote unquote zero equity 10-6 like you would with diamonds or clubs, but even diamonds or clubs gets in there and bets at some frequency, I would say. So let's look at what GTO says about your strategy. It actually employs like a mix of all these bet sizes, 30,
Oh, wow.
60, 700, 150. And I think that's because there's a lot of different types of hands that you can make on this board, such that you can overbet sometimes, right? You can just go for big bet sometimes, and then sometimes you just go for like a little bet, right? Like big bet would be say for like over pair, set, two pair, like smaller bet would be like like top pairs, some like strong 5x, and then like lower would be might be like pocket fours or pocket twos or something like that. Maybe a 3x. So, and then you also have a bunch of draws on this board that you can kind of balance that with. So let's look at 10-6 suited. You can see 10-6 suited, like it's close between all the options. But it does say like you should be betting this at a pretty high frequency, even without the backdoors. And that's
Wow.
for the reasons I highlighted earlier, which is that you can never get to showdown and win with this hand. So EV of bet is actually something to be considered.
Because you get four equity, right?
Right. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the only thing you get EV from in this spot.
Yeah, exactly. So if everyone's calling, then it's minus EV.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like EV of bet is still not always great. The opponent will have like like a good amount of pairs and things like that will call you, and you will lose. And then you will lose even more money than if you check. But you can definitely fold some other kind of speculative hands here, right? Like you definitely fold, call it Jack 7 offsuit, right? With a bet, you can definitely
Yeah.
fold some queen highs.
That's a lot of pressure on the
Queen
opponent.
7 off, queen 6 off, like. I mean, I tend to think that like zero showdown value hands like this, bottom of the range, should be turned into a bluff. And the reason like your bluffs actually are relatively kind of break even with checks is that like yes, sometimes you get snapped and called down and things like that. But if you would never bluff, then you would never get EV for any of your better hands.
Right.
The way GTO works though is of course that every hand is treated separately. Like there are no loss leaders like, oh, like my bluffing here is going to lose money so that like my super strong hands are going to win more money, right? Bluffing is actually quote unquote like break even, and then your strong hands are like what generate the most EV, like your value generates the most EV.
Yep.
But essentially if you didn't bluff, what would happen is not so much that they would like lose money or anything like that. Your bluffs would still be break even. The rest of your range, your value part of your range would go down in EV because now your opponents can overfold to you safely.
Right.
So that I think that's an interesting part about this. So you check, and I did flop top pair. Again, 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds. Turn is a jack. Turn is a jack of spades. So on this turn, I checked again. I think, like 10-8 off is very middle of my range. It's probably in the upper middle of my range, if I'm honest here. I do have a handful of better 10s. I obviously have jacks. I have some 2 pairs here as well. Some flushes as well. Was just thinking that check here is good. Don't want to play big pot with it. Yes, like this card is an over card and puts 3-2 a flush out, and so maybe I get some value from betting, and you call with some sort of over card plus draw type hands, right? So that was a thought that crossed my mind. But I figured I should probably bet at like fairly low frequency here. So with my combos, yeah, 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds. Yeah, mostly prefers check, but you can see, bet gets in there sometimes. Right?
Yep.
It's not kind of pure action here. And then your thoughts on, betting this turn? Yes, no.
I was basically the same thing. I didn't want to play a big pot with just 10-6 and no draws. So I just checked. It should be pretty straightforward.
Got it. Yeah, so you can see, like, again, 10-6 loves betting here because essentially
Oh.
it says, okay, like, my hand is absolute trash. I basically don't win against anything, but I can fold out things that are better. And it helps me get EV for my value. So I'm going to bet here, right? Like, you could, when you have a bluff like this, I think the easiest thing to think about when you pull the trigger is what kind of value hands do I have here? And then what sizings do I want to go for with those value hands? Right. If you have a Jack X here, like, would you bet? Let's say you have Ace Jack. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Yeah, you're betting, right? You're
Yeah.
probably betting.
Yeah.
So when you think of like the worst hand that you could possibly have, right? Like 10-6 is close to that worst hand.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always like, I don't know what to do when I hit air and then I just have the worst possible hand. But that kind of answers the question because like I never know when to bluff, for example, with 10-6 suited.
Yep. Yeah, just think like you zero EV hand, like should be bluffing.
And I always forget the concept of like fold equity. The fact that they're gonna be folding with a lot better hands. I always think that they're gonna have a better hand and they're gonna call.
Yeah, well, that's not always true.
Yeah. And they don't know I have a bluff.
Yeah, I mean, I
So-
can have king six offsuit and like, no draw whatsoever on this type of board, and that type of hand would fold king seven off, like, like queen. There's not that many queens forward, but I think the point still stands, right? Like maybe queen six suited, queen four suited. I have a lot of hands that can fold, but the thing to remember here is if you want to earn more money with your value hands,
That's the bluff.
then you have to bluff with kind of like the bottom of your range.
Yep.
Right, like kind of maybe it's hard for you as a new player, like just try to err on the side of aggression. That's obviously not that's not like a blanket statement, like, okay, like, if you don't know what to do, err on the side of aggression or something like that. That's not always true. But if you have like a bottom of, if you think about your range, you think about your value, right? And then you think about like what is the middle and then like what is the bottom, like 10-6 clearly is the bottom. So I think like bluffing here would be appropriate. Otherwise, like the unintuitive concept is like you actually lose value for when you have like a really strong hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and for the audience, explain like if your opponent doesn't have bluffs and just straight up bluff or straight up betting and jamming with all their value hands, then how would you exploit that?
Yeah, the way you exploit that is you overfold. And the funny thing is your opponent is not gonna, they're not gonna feel like they're getting exploited, right? Like, oh, I'm winning all these pots and like, like
Yeah.
all this stuff, like, like this guy's folding and I'm winning the pot, like it feels great or whatever.
They're gonna keep doing it.
But the funny thing is, what you should think about is not like, oh, like, did I win the pot? Did I win money? But it's how much money could I have won, right? And if the answer is you could have won more money, then yeah, you're gonna feel bad about, like winning that, then you would think like, okay, I feel bad about winning that smaller pot. It's like if you go to like the carnival or something like that, right? And you go to one of those magicians and he says, okay, I've got two boxes, right? I've got like, $1,000 under one box and then like $500 under the other box. And like, I'm going to shuffle them or whatever. And then you're going to pick one. And like, let's say you go up there and you pick the $500 and you're like, oh, I won $500. Oh, it's like the greatest day of my life. You know, people are going to feel happy that they won that pot, that $500 pot, but they're not going to realize like, hey, you could have won $1,000 pot, right? And so comparatively, like it's worse. So against an opponent who, you know, like essentially only value bets here, when you overfold, like you are denying EV to, or rather, you know, like hands like aces that they might have here, like, you know, some jack or something like that. You're essentially, those hands are not maximizing EV because they're actually not bluffing enough for you to call with worse.
Yeah. And if they want you to call with when they're betting with value, because when they do, when you do call, they win more money, but you know to not call,
Right.
make them win less.
Yeah.
money.
Absolutely. Exactly. Okay. So what's the next board we want to look at? I think what happened here was
Oh yeah.
this went check, check. The river was a 4 of hearts. And I just said it, you know, it's time to get some value for my 8. He can still call with some ace highs here. So you can see like, you know, 8s are betting at a very high frequency here. I think I went like, okay, I went 1.25 into a pot of 2.5 or something like that. So I went half pot. Guess the solver is okay with that size, and like 75%. What is, I guess, you know, you can't call with 10 high, right?
Yeah. Was just like any bet, I'm just folding.
All right, so let's